everybody, and welcome to another hobby cheating video. Today we're back to the Skaven and we're going to be talking all about doing copper and bronze and weathering on it. It's going to be a great time. Let's get into it.
The strict technomancer that is Vincey V. Let us get to the technique and learn it, Vincey V.
So I'm still plugging away on my Skaven army. John Ninus may have forgotten about it. He's stuck in one big piece trying to win a golden demon, and I plan to use his weakness to my advantage. So today I'm working on my Jezzails, a pretty important part of any Skaven army. And they have these big tanks, backpacks on them. So that's going to require some copper or bronze or whatever we want to talk about. And I've got a new method of doing it for these guys I do really like and I like the effect of. So I'm going to take you through the process today and how to create fast but still convincing and credible copper or bronze. It'll work kind of for either. And then how to weather it up and make it look cool. Let's head over to the desk. Let's get painting. All right, we're going to start with a specific mix here. So the mix I'm going to use is actually Vallejo Metal Color Silver. So just this is the bright but sort of blank silver. But you could use any of the bright Vallejo metal colors or frankly any bright silver paint. It's just this happens to work the best since it's quite metallic and thin. And I'm going to actually mix in Talos Bronze. Now this is a Speed Paint 2.0. And I really like the Speed Paint metallics. I had reviewed them previously on the channel. And I'm going to mix in basically 4 or 5 drops of the bronze to 1 drop of the silver. Now, why? Well, the silver is going to lighten it up some, but it'll also increase some of the opacity. The speed paints are really good on their own, and honestly, if you were working with something heavily zenithal, you could probably just use it straight. But as I tend to work over something either very lightly zenithal or just black with this army, I need to make it up the opacity, hence we're adding in the silver. So just start with a simple base coat of that over the whole surface. No big deal. Took me 2 coats in some areas to get it really fully opaque, but it was still pretty fast. Not too much of a problem. Once that was good, it's time to get to our shading. Now, shading your bronze is really important. You want to, with all metals, we have to sort of take a non-metallic type footing and we have to place some shadows. So I begin with some warm brown from Pro Acryl, and I just start carefully glazing it into all of the areas I want. So this is it's a big cylinder here we're working on, so I pick basically the 2 sides off of the highlight, and I just glaze it in there. This isn't a huge change or shift color-wise. It's actually pretty similar color-wise. But because it's regular paint, it's going to be quite matte. Now, the thinness of the glaze will mean some of the shine still comes through, so I do about 2 applications of the glaze to get it all in place. So as you rotate around, even though it will remain the same color, it will actually reduce the shine and appear to be a darker shadow. We're going to reinforce that with the next steps. So, my next step is I take some Pro Acryl Brown Gray. This is a wonderful color from the Signature Series from Matt Sexwish and Ben Komitz. And I mix it about 50-50 with that warm brown, and I repeat the glazing step, this time covering a little less. So maybe 50-60% of what I covered the first time. So now we'll transition from the intense bronze, that's very reflective, into sort of the same color, but weakly reflective, into a true darker color that's not reflective at all. So we get that nice transition just through the glazes. Again, about 2 applications of that glaze over these small areas, and we're good to go. There's a couple other little bronze pieces, by the way, on this that I'm working on incidentally as I'm doing this big tank. Next up, with my shadows placed, and they're nice and dark, it's time to get some highlights in place. So I mix in just another drop of silver into my previous bronze mix. Basically, I take like the silver, mix it about 50-50 with the previous bronze mix, and then I apply that as a thin highlight. So I do thin this down with some water, and I create a nice light line down the column of the thing. I hit all of the edges, I hit the raised part on top, and so on and so forth. Basically applying some nice simple highlights in the opposite places that I put the shadows. So all in all, relatively easy and quick process. I do use kind of a stippling method here and kind of a lot of scratchy applications with the brush to make sure that I get it spread out and move that pigment all the way around and create a nice simple fade. If when you do it, there's a bit too hard of a line between the silver and the bronze, just take some of the regular Talos bronze itself, thin it down 1-to-1 with just some water, and then kind of do a quick glaze over the edge of the silver. Boom, job's a good, and you'll be back into sort of a smoother transition. Very easy. Okay. Now, the next step is to begin applying the weathering. We've got the sort of the base progression of the bronze down. If you want really clean bronze, stop here. If you're just looking for, if you're doing some bronze on your own troops and you want it to be nice and shiny and fresh, you're done. Congratulations. Well done, you. You did a great job. But if you want it like me, the Skaven, well, they don't take great care of their stuff. Then it's time to actually weather it up. So we're going to talk about how I apply Verdigris. And no, it's not just slather the thing in nilic oxide, although that will play a bit of a role, as you saw from the paints earlier. I'm going to start by mixing a sort of 50-50 mix of Verdigris and that dark brown gray. Now, you might think to yourself, what? Why? Okay, two things. One, we're going to use this very thin down. So I mix it and then I thin it way down. And then I start applying it almost like a very targeted wash into recesses and cracks and crevices. It will be very weak and it will create a little bit of darkness in there while also creating a little bit of that green tone. The mix of that dark brown that is my shadow color with the Verdigris that I want to hide in the recesses creates this sort of nice magical mix. And I thin it way down. It will look a lot stronger when you initially put it on than when it actually dries. So do take note, this will fade and get weaker as it dries, as many paints often do. And so I'm hitting things like under the rim where water could collect. Anytime there's like two joints together, anywhere where water would naturally gather, collect, and then cause enhanced oxidation, that's where I'm focusing this little targeted wash. I am not washing the whole thing. I am doing it, as you can see, in very specific places. Now, once that's done, I then start doing some cool streaks. So I'm going to start taking that same mix and where, on things like the tank, where it's this big sort of column-like shape, I just start pulling down streaks, little thin streaks. Some are small, some are long, and I just lay them over top of each other and do a lot of streaks repeatedly. It really does sell this effect. It's crazy how much better this looks after the streaks go on than before. I can't explain why it's so real to us and why it's so credible to the human eye, but trust me, if you've got any kind of long, flat surface where you can work streaks in to your weathering, do it. That's true for all types of weathering, but it especially works great here and just provides for a really cool look. Next up, I go to just sort of pure Verdigris, and what I'm going to do there is reinforce some of those areas where I want more fresh oxidation. So here I focus on things like deep recesses or edges where they would naturally be more exposed, more easily chipped and damaged, more easily than susceptible to weathering. I also thin it down some and then reinforce some of those streaks, not all. So I do less here, but sometimes I'll trace a streak, sometimes I'll make a new one, make a new little one, whatever, to show that there's layers of that streaking that have happened on the tank where it's constantly sort of, boiled out some kind of acidic, awful warp liquid and then kind of ran out. But I build up those streaks accordingly and just kind of get those in place with that bright Verdigris. Now, the next step is where we actually go to the nilic oxide. And here I use it very sparingly and very thin. I start with a moist brush, and you can see I just kind of tap it in around in some places where I want it really thin to reinforce some stronger weathering. So again, in things like recesses or in the cracks or chips or stuff like that. And then yet again, I do a couple of streaks with this as well. This is actually going to end up being the most bright and intense when it dries over these other colors. So I want to make sure I use this quite sparingly and just to really give that final pop and intensity to the Verdigris on the actual, on the copper. Okay, with that all in place, we're basically done. But if you looked at the paints I showed at the beginning, you'll notice that I had a little bit of Seraphim Sepia in there. What is this for? So this is an interesting thing you can do. Once you have all your weathering in place, you can come back in with the Seraphim Sepia. And around the edges of your verdigris, or at certain points in the middle of it, and so on, like you just take some of that Seraphim Sepia with like a slightly damp brush, and you just kind of stipple it in. Into the actual verdigris in some places, like as little dots, on the edges of some of the verdigris to soften the transition between where the oxidation is and where the copper is. Anywhere where you want to reinforce or smooth out some of the shadows, you can do this. So if you have some rough transitions into your shadows from the earlier glazes, give a nice sweep over that whole area. The Seraphim Sepia will matte that area down, reduce some of the shine, but it'll also act as a little bit of like yellowing and browning to some of the verdigris to show where there's little dots of maybe copper that have been scratched through, or like the verdigris been scratched away. Verdigris is very thin. It actually wears off quite easily. So having a few little dots of like this subtle hint of that yellow-brown shining through or being there can add a lot to enrich the overall impression of the verdigris. It's a completely optional step, but it's one I think is pretty cool, as it can help smooth the transition between the verdigris, smooth your earlier steps, and add credibility to your actual verdigris streaks and areas, all at the same time with one simple, easy application of a shade color. So with that, we're all done. I painted up the rest of him, as obviously this was all one of the first steps I did, very unusually for the metals. But here's how he looks. I think he came out pretty cool. One down. Many more of Gisele's to go, but I'm pretty happy with how he came out. If you liked this, give it a like. Subscribe if you haven't already. We've got new videos here every Saturday. If you've got questions about copper or bronze or applying weathering and verdigris to them that I didn't cover in this video, do just drop those down below. I always answer every question asked, and I love hearing from all of you. If you want to support the channel and keep more lessons like this coming, or more tutorials like this coming, hey, lots of ways you can do so. You can do the aforementioned liking and subscribing and sharing. All of that's free. But if you want to support the channel monetarily, there are affiliate links down there. They don't cost you anything extra. In fact, they often save you money, and they give a nice kickback to the channel. Please hit those up for buying all your hobby supplies. There's also the games down there that Uncle Adam and I make, so you can find your newest skirmish obsession. And of course, there's our Patreon, focused on review and feedback and taking your next step on your hobby journey. As always, though, I thank you so much for watching this one, and we'll see you next time.